Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming to the latest webinar in the Global series. Today, we'll be talking about developing self-access materials for your learners. My name is George Heritage. I work in the Madrid office for Cambridge Assessment English, and with me is my colleague.
Hello, my name is Victoria, and I work with George in the Madrid office for Cambridge Assessment English.
So what will we be looking at today?
We are going to start by looking at the benefits that self-access material can bring to your students and to your classes. Then we will also have a look at some key elements that we need to take into account when creating self-access material. And we will finish with some challenges that we may experience and also try to give you some ideas to solve them. Excellent. Or to overcome them.
And also, sorry, just before we continue, a link to the certificate of attendance will be provided by our colleagues towards the end of the session. Okay, so don't worry about that. And we'll also be providing a link to a handout with lots of the bits and pieces that we mentioned today. So I think we're going to start with a couple of questions. Looking at the advantages of self-access material. When do you use self-access material? And Victoria?
When is self-access material useful? In the chat box.
In the chat box, please. So when do you use self-access material and when is it useful? Flipped classroom, in the class, flipped classroom. It's useful all the time. Excellent, that is the right answer.
For homework as well.
Supplementing the school textbook, part of the blended approach, definitely. At the end of the class, all the time. Great. For homework, independent practice. Oh, we saw the same one at the same time. Project work, presentations. During lessons, prepping for exams. That's what we like to hear. Reinforcement activities, great. Helpful for promoting autonomy, lovely. When we want. Progress checks, lovely. What did we come up with, Victoria?
Okay, I think most of what we are going to mention was already mentioned by our participants in the chat box. So let's start maybe with consolidation. Self-access material is a good complement that can be used to reinforce and consolidate the content we have already covered in class.
Yeah, and definitely to help support learner autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
It's always useful to have a sort of supplementary bank of self-access material so learners can decide when they want to do it. So perhaps the stronger students or the fast finishers can do this material, whilst perhaps the weaker students are continuing. And then the weaker students or the less, I hate saying weaker, Victoria, don't you? The students who need more support can decide what is useful for them and when.
Mm-hmm.
Which leads into
differentiation. So yeah, if we design our resources offering different stages and different activities, for instance, extension activities, sorry, for stronger students, they can feel more challenged, and if the other students only do the rest of the activities, they will still cover the basic material.
The core content. And I think for all of these runs, greater flexibility. I think over the last 9 months, we've all learned to become more flexible in both the way we deliver classes, perhaps some of the content that we're looking at. But with a lot of self-access materials, students should be able to access more stuff without much support, which in turn allows for greater flexibility in your lessons, because students will always have something to do. And the resources can hopefully be adapted to their learning and to their and your needs. So if you want to give personal feedback, but want to keep the rest of the class busy, you can send the rest off to have a go at some self-access materials, for example. Is that right, Victoria?
Yes, I think it is useful. Mm-hmm.
So that's the first section done. On to creating self-access material. I think we have another question.
Yeah, we're going to start with another question.
What are the key aspects we should and we need to consider when we're creating self-access material? So what key aspects should be taken into account when we're creating? Students' needs, excellent.
Student
Correct
level
answer from
and
Clementine,
age.
thank you. Accessibility, excellent. Low cost or no cost?
Clear instructions. Objectives.
Different types of learners. Authenticity, excellent. Relevance, outcomes, clear descriptions.
Free material.
Clear objectives. Variety. Output.
Time.
Primary language. Time. Need for differentiation. Your students' different learning strategies or approaches. Assessment criteria, excellent. Multiple intelligences. Some wonderful ideas here. Okay, again, what did we come up with, Victoria? I think everything's been covered.
Yes. Yes. The first thing, objectives. So this is really the starting point of everything we do in class. We need to connect it to the learning objectives. So we need to take them into account, bear them in mind, to produce the material. And then, George, instructions?
Instructions, definitely, they always need to be clear. But I do think we've all learned a lot, again, over the last 9 months, moving to online, where the importance of clear, simple instructions, I think, has increased, because you don't have that sort of spontaneous, that spontaneity that you often have in a face-to-face class, where you rapidly realize your instructions were awful and everybody's doing the opposite of what you're asking them to do. We have to think about that more clearly with self-access materials. And part of that as well, I think, Victoria?
Yeah, staging. This has to do with instructions and also with scaffolding, so helping our students build up their skills.
And skills integration as far as possible. I think we very rarely, in our own languages, focus on one skill at a time. We naturally use a combination of all of our skills. So I think trying to integrate skills as far as possible within self-access materials makes the learning more real, feel more natural. And again, feeding into this, I think.
Yeah, it also improves learning, because if we receive input orally and in writing, we can the link in our memory is stronger, so it is going to help us learn better.
And of course, you have to think about assessment and feedback, and the interplay between both of those. You know, these are both key for students to reflect on what they've done, how they're going to use it to then further improve their learning. But you do have to think carefully about how that assessment is going to be built in, or how you're going to be dealing with feedback, especially if you're dealing with lots of different students. And I think we've all discovered lots of great, easy, quick ways to deliver feedback and assessment online, again, over the last while. Next slide, Victoria.
Moving on. We are going to talk a bit more about learning objectives. And we are going to start by saying that, of course, they need to be clear for our students, their age, their level. So depending on that, they will need much or more or less support. Also, George?
They should, as far as possible, always be sort of designed, or they should go in line with real life skills. The learning needs to be meaningful for our students, which I think makes it more successful. But students need to see a clear connection between what they learn and what they actually need to be able to communicate in real life outside the classroom.
And it is very important as well that it is integrated with the curriculum. So we don't want to teach contents in isolation. There should be a logical progression in the contents that they are going to learn.
And lastly, it should be manageable. Short-term objectives can often be much more motivating. It's much easier to see one's own progression as a student and as a teacher, I think. So I think this feeds into what we were talking about earlier about staging, etc. chopping things down into manageable chunks as far as possible, especially if it's more self-access than things you're going to be dealing with face-to-face or in class.
Mm-hmm.
On to, oh, sorry.
No, this connects to what we're going to say next. Having very clear objectives also gives learners a sense of direction and purpose, because they know where they are heading and the reason why they are doing the different activities they are doing to get this objective.
Which feeds into giving them a sense of agency, so they have a better understanding of the different elements of learning, how it builds up to the bigger picture, and they can then take a more active role in their learning. And connecting this learning with assessment, Victoria.
Yeah, it kind of connects, closes the circle. So the learning objectives should be aligned, or the assessment criteria, the assessment methods should be aligned with the learning objectives, so that everything makes sense in the learning process.
Okay, so we're going to have a look at some examples now. I think these are taken from your New English classroom, or a lot of the material that was created over the summer. Here we have an extract from a C1 advanced lesson plan focusing on the writing, and B1 preliminary focusing on reading and vocabulary. Yeah. What's important about this, Victoria? Why is this on screen?
Well, because it's a lesson summary that it's available at the beginning of the worksheet of the activity, and it shows the different elements that students are going to, or the different contents that students are going to work on during the self-access material. So in this case, at C1, we are going to help them work on writing an essay, the different parts, the different stages of the writing process. And for B1, we're going to make them aware of the importance of the different types of reading, of course, at the right level, and also how to work on vocabulary.
Exactly. So if we move on to the C1, it's breaking everything down and making it relevant, especially at this level, I think, to how these are, how these relate to real life skills. So reviewing the format and focus, obviously getting used to writing discursive essays, researching a topic online in English, very useful skill in their further academic lives and careers, making notes on useful ideas, vocab to help you write the essay, and strategies for planning, writing, and reviewing your written work. B1, Victoria?
Yeah, they're going to build their food-related vocabulary, also find out.
Sorry.
It's okay. Find out more about the different reading strategies and types of reading. Then also develop and practice reading skills, and also reflect on the progress, which we have mentioned before, that it's something very important.
Lovely. So moving on to instructions in a bit more detail.
Yes.
Tell us about instructions, Victoria. What is important to bear in mind when we are creating our instructions?
Yeah, if we are producing self-access material, without a doubt, the instructions should be clear enough for students to follow them without support. So we need to try and foresee all the potential problems and difficulties that our students may have, and try to prepare for them. So I think you mentioned last Tuesday having a plan B. It's always important.
Yeah. What's our plan B if Zoom fails? Just send the handout. Instructions should always be written, obviously, with your target audience in mind, but should be adapted to and appropriate to a student's age and level, which I don't think is, how do I say this? I don't think it's the younger they are, the more support they will need. The lower, the older they are, the less support. I think it sort of goes in a bit of an X. I find that lower level adults often need more support than lower level young people. Do you know what I mean, Victoria? Do you think that's the case? I remember having
I haven't thought about it
yet, A2 adults sometimes needs a lot more step by step, whereas a lot of our younger learners who will just sort of get on with it. But always bear their age and level in mind, I think. Give students a selection of ways to deal with the activity or to approach the material, which I think we were speaking about earlier about differentiation and giving your learners a sense of agency. So if we offer a selection of ways, we and they can hopefully be better prepared for potential problems that may arise, and makes the material in itself more flexible and easier to use.
Okay, so how do we put this into practice, George?
Well, bullet points. Victoria is a big fan of bullet points. Make sure your instructions are clearly laid out using bullet points and numbers, making the structure of the activity clear.
Yes, and also trying. Of course, this depends on the level and the student's age, but trying to keep instructions short and simple so that students have very clear what they need to do, and if they need to refer back to it, that they know where to find it.
And I think, as far as possible, always add an example of what they need to do. You'll be familiar with lots of our exams do have examples. All our young learners exams, I think a lot of first and advanced, preliminary and key after the last revision, some of the examples were removed. So if you are preparing students for those exams, make sure they do have a bit of practice beforehand. But I think an example, wherever possible, where there's space, for example, it's always good to show them what they need to do, because again, like I said before, sometimes when you're in class and you've given instructions, you realize 2 minutes later that they were awful and everybody's doing the opposite of what you asked them to. So even more important with self-access material, make it clear what their objectives and what they are being asked to do. Anything else, Victoria, before we move on? No, staging.
No, staging.
So, Victoria, the stage is yours.
They need to be clear. They should guide the student in their learning. So of course we need to make them as clear and easy to follow as possible.
Should be manageable. Let's be realistic. They shouldn't be too overwhelming, especially for self-access, I think, because once you feel overwhelmed, it's quite easy to give up. And should always, as far as possible, show a logical progression. From less to more challenging, normally, I would say that's at least how our exams are designed. They get from easier to more difficult as you go through the parts. We have a lot of data to show that if an easier activity follows a more difficult one, candidates' performance is affected on the easier one because they've done a more difficult activity beforehand. So bear that in mind. I think it's fine to have sort of activities in parallel to stretch the stronger students, but the core material should probably get slightly more challenging as you go through.
George, I've just seen a question in the chat box asking about whether we should include time, like time reference for students to have these in mind when they are doing the activity.
I mean, I think it depends on your students, really, doesn't it? If you're creating material for a large number of students with a big range of abilities, it might not be so appropriate. If you know that some students are going to take a lot longer than others, so you don't want to discourage people. But yeah, I mean, for things like, especially exam specific reading, yeah, I would say, especially at high levels, if you're focusing on skimming or scanning, for example, give them time limits. If a very long text, give them a short time limit so they don't spend 15 minutes reading the whole text, reading the questions, reading the whole text. Depends very much on the focus of the activity, I think. Writing, if you're getting close to an exam, if you're preparing them for exam, maybe ask them to time themselves, play around with a realistic sort of time limit so that they are getting used to producing text within a fixed amount of time. It all depends, I think, on the focus of the activity. Do you agree, Victoria?
Yes, I totally agree with you. It just depends on the focus of the activity.
I would say yes and no. It depends. So sorry, it's not a very useful answer, but I hope we were clear as to our reasoning behind that. So remaining on stages, what stages can you all think of? When putting together self-access materials, what stages should you try and include?
Maybe while we wait for some answers,
Pre-reading.
George.
There you go. We already got one.
Brainstorming.
Concentrate, Victoria. Whilst we're waiting for some answers, what?
No, there was another question in the chat box about the type of interaction that we can allow for when using self-access material. So if we are using self-access material in class and we think that maybe students need a bit more support, maybe they can work in pairs. What do you think?
Oh yeah, and I mean it depends on your context as well, but I mean if you're doing things online, perhaps they could go off and work together in groups online. I think again it depends very much on the focus of the activity. We've got lots of great ideas in here on stages. Post-reading, pre, during, post-task, vocab, working together.
Peer instruction, nice.
Scaffolding, excellent. I think scaffolding probably runs throughout the activities, again, depending. Demonstration, warm-up activities, peer correction, a forum to discuss, lovely.
Nice.
Scaffolding again, yeah, if you've seen me and Victoria giving presentations, you know we're big fans of scaffolding.
Feedback,
motivation. Modeling, nice. Analysis, design, development, implementation, evaluation. Well, Alex has covered pretty much everything. Yeah, lovely. What did we come up with?
Okay, we thought about these possible stages, so get started. This is mainly, or maybe even more important, with the hybrid situation. If some of your students are learning online, so it is nice to tell them what type of material or what material they will need. So if they will need headphones or a microphone, or if they need paper. So anything that is relevant for them and useful, maybe it's a good idea to include it at the beginning so that they are prepared.
Yeah, like a little checklist would work tidily. The warm-up stage, which a lot of people mentioned, get them in the mood, activate their schemata, try and get them motivated. Then moving on to practice, so the focus of the activity, obviously again it depends on what the material is on, but the sort of core, the core practice, or maybe input and practice, depending again on the activity.
Also, follow-up, which can be an activity to consolidate and reinforce the main content of the previous activity, or it can be used to build on the content, integrating different skills. So speaking into writing or listening into speaking. So different options here for your follow-up activity.
Yep. And then alongside or after the follow-up, a sort of extension or aiming high activity, again for our fast finishers or our stronger students, to try and give them something to push themselves a little bit further. And I think in all activities and materials and activities and materials, sorry, I was a little bit distracted there. We should always have this final stage, Victoria.
Reflect, yeah. So we will talk about this in a minute, but some kind of reflection, self-assessment, some sort of assessment is nice is nice to have, and it should be, when possible, should be made a routine in our lessons.
I like overly saying criteria, definitely. Obviously, it depends on the focus, but for speaking activities, for writing activities, definitely include some criteria. Victoria and I have done quite a few presentations looking at what we like to call success criteria, which I think, do we have any in here, Victoria?
Yes.
We do, which is writing appropriate criteria for students to be using. We'll look at that in a bit more detail later, but yes, definitely. multi-mode input, Victoria. We spoke
Mm-hmm.
about this before, using a mixture of written or video or audio, but beyond that,
Mm-hmm.
we're focusing perhaps on vocabulary at this point.
Yes, sometimes when we think that about learning vocabulary, do we learn the vocabulary that we have covered in one lesson? Probably we need some repetition. We need to come across this vocabulary several times before it sticks. We need to try to produce meaningful encounters, so students find the opportunity to use this vocabulary in context, and that this context is also relevant for them. We should try to include spaced repetition. So probably the idea is not to repeat the same vocabulary for 1 week and then forget about it, but try to include it again in our lessons from time to time. And this leads to the balance between new and old content in our lessons. It is a good idea to include some old content at the beginning for reinforcement, for consolidation, and then link this to some new content here. And George?
And lastly, yeah, a combination of different types of input, different types of practice. I've got people saying we need criteria for the answers. Yes, it depends on the focus of the self-assessment, but something like Wordwall, which is up here. What else can we use? Quizlet, quizzes, Mentimeter or Mentimeter, Flippity. Lots of great ways to create a lot of material very easily. I did put together some exercises on Wordwall the other day. I think it took me about 2 minutes to do one vocab activity, and they were instantly, it was available in 15 different styles or versions, Victoria?
Yes, and that's
Class Dojo, Nelio has just said, yeah, there's loads of stuff.
That's the advantage, right? Because if we present the input in different ways, students will not have the impression that they are just repeating exactly the same content, and it is more motivating for them.
Yeah. Caitlin has just said she's a big fan of Padlet. We are enormous fans of Padlet as well. You can use Padlet in lots of different ways. Something like Wordwall, Flippity, you do have fixed templates that you then use. Padlet, I think you can do pretty much whatever you want on Padlet. And I think Padlet's a really nice place, what Victoria was talking about, the balance between old and new. If you have a new Padlet every week, or an ongoing Padlet, perhaps of vocab or content that you've covered, so there's a nice record somewhere, and you can use it to refer back and do that sort of incremental building on material that Victoria was talking about. We read something a while ago about, we weren't quite sure about this, but yeah, I would say we probably forget a lot of the vocab that we learn in 24 hours unless we use it, unless we have meaningful encounters with it. But this said, what does it say? A minimum, the students have to encounter vocab a minimum of 6 times and a maximum of 17 times or 16 times. So once they've seen it 17 times, they will forget it. Not quite sure how they came up with that conclusion. But building and refreshing and building and refreshing, I think is key, especially with vocabulary. Skills integration, Victoria?
Yeah, whenever we integrate different skills in our lessons, in our material, we are making the learning process more realistic, because as you said before, George, we rarely use skills in isolation in real life, so it is nice to bring that to our classroom.
Virginia, 6 encounters is insufficient to know a word. Exactly, it all depends on the level of acquisition and probably the level of our learners as well. Skills integration, improving learning. Yes, it definitely does improve learning. I think if input comes in different forms, we do help remember it better if we've seen it written, if we hear it, if we then use it, obviously. So integrating skills as far as possible within the materials that we're asking our students to use will help with that. It's also really useful for brainstorming, Victoria.
Mm-hmm. Yes, here we can see an example. We can use speaking to discuss information, to make students or to try to motivate our students, and also help them activate their vocabulary and schemata. And then reading is very useful for research. So if we want our students to have some background information, they can read about the topic of the lesson and get some ideas that they can later use for the different activities.
And going back to the circle, skills integration sort of completes learning. What do you mean by that, Victoria?
Yeah, that if we find a word in writing, then we learn how to spell it. We learn to recognize it in writing. Then we see it in a context, and then if we come across this wording orally in listening, then we also learn to recognize the pronunciation, and probably the context in which we hear it is different. So then we are better prepared to produce it in writing or orally, and we also have a better understanding of how to use it.
Excellent. So, assessment, our favorite. Is assessment always necessary, everyone? Yes or no? Christopher says no.
Oui.
Yes, yes. Our first answer was no. Then lots of yeses. Sure. I would say yes. Everybody's saying yes, and it's going too quickly. Assessment, yes. Evaluation, no. Ooh. I wonder who said that. Was it Karamin? Can't see. Summative and formative. Assessment is, but feedback is better. Definitely. Definitely.
Of
Formative. Excellent. Excellent. So we would say yes, but what do we mean by assessment? You'll notice here we have not mentioned a summative assessment, for which, we are famous with B2 first, etc. But don't worry, we're moving as quickly as possible towards a much more formative approach to assessment, which I think technology is more and more allowing us. If we look at these three areas, self-assessment, Victoria, and peer assessment.
Yes, some sort of assessment is always relevant. Self-assessment, peer assessment are going to make students aware of their abilities, their weaknesses, what they need to improve. And it is going to also make them more familiar with the assessment criteria so that they have the tools to guide their learning. So this is again going to be fostering independence and learning autonomy.
And hopefully the self and peer assessment can then, once it does become more routine and part of their normal sort of learning routines, it will complement the kind of formative and ongoing assessment that teachers can provide. So yes, we think that assessment is an essential part of learning, but in various forms. And yes, obviously there's also a place for summative assessment. And it's very nice to have a standard or a benchmark to work towards, but everything moving towards that needs support and formative assessment from you as teachers. And hopefully the higher their level becomes, the more self-aware they become as learners as well.
I just read a comment in the chat box saying that peer assessment is dangerous. So
yeah, it can be dangerous, especially if it's just thrown in. You do need sometimes a bit of a culture change, and we know there are certain students, especially at certain ages, who can be quite cruel sometimes. But it does take a while to set up and to make part of normal learning and class time. But once it is integrated as something normal and routine, I think it's incredibly useful.
We are going to look at some ideas to make this peer assessment a bit more structured that could help with this.
Lovely. So
challenges.
What challenges do you face when creating self-access material? Oh, Anastasia, what should we do? Students always assess each other, not critically, but say good or excellent. Give them criteria. Give them a framework to use. And again, we'll look at this in a bit more detail, I think. So what creativity, time was a big answer on Tuesday.
Yeah. Material as well, finding the right material.
Yeah. Vocabulary, it's overwhelming. Insufficient, making engaging material. Lack of familiarity with digital tools. Differentiated instructions. Making it relevant from Rudy. Attractive, making it communicative. Yes, especially whilst all of our students are at home on their own. Promoting autonomy.
Making it motivating.
Time consuming. A lot of experimentation required. Yeah, but I think a lot of teaching is, quite experimental, isn't it? Especially some of the best teaching. And we learn what works well, what doesn't work well, and that will always vary with different students as well, I think. Okay, Victoria.
Okay, we came up with these ideas. So now with the current situation, maybe it is difficult to find a balance between offline and online content.
Yeah.
So we will talk about that. Also accessing the resources. I remember when I set homework and my students came back to me saying, I couldn't find the video, or I couldn't access the
That's
link.
quite an easy excuse, isn't it? But then
Yes.
the internet was very young when you were teaching, wasn't it, Victoria? So
That's not true.
Learners' age and level, creating content that's suitable both for age and level, especially if you're teaching, if you have quite a variety of students. It is difficult. It's time consuming. Yes, Virginia, the dog ate my homework. That old classic. And again, the assessment and the feedback. How do you assess the work? How do you provide the right feedback without it taking over your whole life? It can also be, very, very time consuming. So online versus offline and access, Victoria?
Yeah, when possible, whenever possible, we need to allow for a combination of online and offline resources. So offering links to videos and articles, but also supplementing it with some offline materials. So texts, you can provide them with directly, or videos that you have downloaded beforehand. So that there is no so much reliance on online material.
Yeah, and Jocelyn's made a very good point about being as inclusive as possible. If you have candidates with impaired sight or impaired hearing, got to factor that in. We do factor that into our exams. We have exams available we have a huge range of exams material available for candidates with special requirements, but you also have to factor that in. Be very aware of the situation of your students in your class. Oh, sorry.
Also,
Victoria?
yeah.
Sorry, no, you continue. I just wanted to pick up on that.
Yeah, also making sure that your students have some time off screen. So for young learners, including some coloring or matching activities that they can do on paper, so they don't have to be on screen all the time. Also, graded books are an excellent resource. We shouldn't forget about them, and it is easy for all students to use them. They don't need online support for that. And then maybe writing but not typing on the computer, but writing by hand.
Oh, Victoria. Do you still write a lot by hand, Victoria?
I always have a notebook with my
Oh, well,
notes
actually,
for
yeah, I
the
know you
day,
do.
so
Yeah.
I like it.
It's been so long since I've been working in an office with you, I've forgotten. Consider potential technology-related problems, like, the cyber dog ate my homework, when you're setting the deadline for submission. Allow for plenty of time. Check in regularly to see how students are doing. Give you an update on any problems they might be having with the activities. Another idea might be to allow for a window. You can hand it in between this date and this date, which gives them a bit more responsibility, helps them manage their workload, decide when they can submit the work. A 1 week minimum, including a weekend. You've got to think about whether a weekend's included or not. Anything else to add there, Victoria?
No, I think the idea of the window to promote learner autonomy is also is very important, and I used to do that with my students when I gave them writing for homework. So try to give them plenty of time and allow for the different stages in the writing process, so that they felt comfortable with the final product of the writing.
Excellent.
And trying, the
Oh,
last
yeah.
idea, George.
Sorry, you go. Although this contradicts us saying having a plan B, trying as far as possible to make sure the resources are all available in one or a couple of places. Padlet's a really nice way to direct students off into different areas, but at least as much of the material should be as accessible as possible in one place. Things like Google Classrooms are wonderful for this. We all know that having too many windows open or too many different photocopies makes activities more difficult, and students can get lost more easily. So try as far as possible to condense your resources into one or a couple of places. It's another tip.
Yeah, this is an idea. This can be adapted to our students' age and, well, mainly age. So, for example, here with Google Classroom, you can have different resources, but everything is there for students to see. They have the instructions, they have the 2 pictures that they need to describe, and also they have the success criteria there for them to offer peer assessment. So everything is there, and it's easier for them to find everything they need. And this can also be adapted for the younger ones. This is on Padlet, so you can see that these are the different stages of the activity. All is there. So we start with some warm-up to describe a picture and ask some questions. Then once they have activated the vocabulary and become a bit more interested in the topic, they are ready to watch the video. And then we are sending them to Kahoot. We are going to use Kahoot, but the link is there for them to just click and go there, so they don't need to find it anywhere else. And then the last part of the activity, which is telling a story, we are providing them with the different screenshots to guide their storytelling. So that makes it easier for them to follow the different stages of the activity.
Thank you, Victoria. Oh, here it is, the success criteria. Try to allow for a range of assessment and feedback options as far as possible. We looked at Kahoot and WordWall. Well, we've spoken about Kahoot and WordWall, which are really good for vocab, for fixed answer activities. For something like writing or speaking, allow for a range of feedback options. For self-assessment and peer assessment, a structured activity like this one is really nice. So students can understand and use it without any problems. If it's the first time you're using it, allow for time in class the students to look over the success criteria beforehand, see if they have any questions or any doubts about it, and then maybe reflect on the assessment process, talk about the problems and difficulties they've experienced after they've had to go using it. Okay, this is based very explicitly on our A2 key assessment criteria, but it is written down to level. All of our assessment criteria has been written for qualified examiners who understand the language, but what's really important is writing it down to level and making it accessible and understandable and clear for your students. And it's a really nice way to support or start building peer assessment into the class alongside self-assessment. Anything else there, Victoria?
Yes. Well, we've seen that checklists or success criteria are a more structured approach to self-assessment and peer assessment. Another alternative, a bit more flexible in this case, is using Google Docs to encourage our students to practice collaborative writing. So with these, they can suggest ideas, find mistakes and suggest improvements, also add, for example, examples. So it is a more flexible option for students who are more familiar with the self-assessment and peer assessment option, and also who have maybe a bit of a higher level to make the most of these two.
And whenever we are trying to encourage students, do you want to go back a slide, Victoria?
Yeah, sorry, yes.
Wherever we're trying to build peer and self-assessment in, what's really important here, we have these questions, a yes and a no, but then comments or examples. And this is how all of our examiners mark writing and speaking. You can find sample scripts in all of our handbooks for each level, so A2 key, B1 preliminary, the teacher's handbooks. You have a selection of different scripts at different levels, and you have the examiner's comments and the way that they mark there. And they always quote the criteria, give an example, quote the criteria, give an example. Exactly the same with our free speaking exam videos on YouTube. When you can download the examiner's comments, there's quote the criteria and give an example. And getting students really used to this will help them a lot. I think help them become more aware of their own strengths and weaknesses, and improve their learning.
Because they see a clear connection, right, between their performance and the assessment criteria, the way it has been assessed. So it's not, because sometimes when we give a mark, or it's too general, so sometimes we need more specific feedback if we want to foster learning. So I think this connection between examples and assessment criteria is crucial for students.
Excellent. If we move on a couple, so yeah, Google Docs, another really nice way for you to give feedback. Is Screencast or Screencast-O-Matic, where you can record your screen and your microphone at the same time. So as you read, as you read your students' writing, for example, you can record feedback for them. That's really nice to, again, vary the input of the feedback that they're giving. So you can just talk through the feedback on an essay is a really nice, tidy way to deliver feedback. And Flipgrid. We've spoken to teachers using Flipgrid to deliver like their whole lessons. Here, I think we were doing a practice for a speaking, wasn't it, Victoria?
Yes,
super easy to use, super easy to use Flipgrid, and it's very sort of younger learner friendly. Again, you have to check with your school and with parents, but you know, from 9-10-year-olds to 15-16-year-olds, I think this would be great. They can record a video, it comes straight to you, and then you have various options for feedback. Here, I think the built-in ones on this, where you give them a mark for ideas, for performance, and write a few comments. Students love it, and it's a different way to especially for speaking, and it does also have the advantage of students being able to record themselves, and if they're not happy with it, try it again, which doesn't happen in class, especially surrounded by classmates. So check Flipgrid out. It's very cool, very useful. Anything else, Victoria, before we finish? Oh yeah, our favorite.
Other types of assessment.
Write and Improve. Can you talk us through Write and Improve, Victoria?
Yes, Write and Improve is a website that is available to practice writing. Students have different types of tasks for different levels. They can choose the task they would like to do, and then they can type in their answers. They can also copy and paste. They can check, and they get instant feedback in terms of level of the CFR, but also at word, phrase, and sentence level. Very important. They get guidance. Okay, so it's not that we are going to correct the mistakes for them. We're just going to point out that there is something that is not working well, and it is their responsibility to make the piece of writing better, to improve it, following our the aspects that have been pointed out, and then they can resubmit their piece of writing and see how they are making progress.
See how they've improved. And yes, it is free. There is an additional functionality that is paid for, but in terms of what we're showing you here, Write and Improve is completely free, and it's a great tool. As Victoria said, it's not a spell check, it's not a grammar check, it's not Grammarly. It directs students towards where the problems are and puts the responsibility in their hand, and I think it really helps them build on drafting and revisiting writing, which I think is a really important academic skill for their future as well. We also have Read and Improve, which at the moment is still very much in development, but you go to Read and Improve. It is still a research project, as I say. You go to Read and Improve, you choose the level you're aiming for, and it harvests the internet for articles that it feels are at level. It presents the article to read. You can hover over most of the words. It will give you a Cambridge Dictionary definition, and the artificial intelligence will guess what part of speech it is, which is normally it's very close to being correct. But what's really cool is at the bottom of each article is a little box where they can write a summary of the article they've written. Then it gives them a mark on their relevance and their writing, very similarly to Write and Improve. So it's a very cool. It's still in development. I just saw somebody saying in the chat box that Speak and Improve as well. It's not as good as Write and Improve, and no, it's not at the moment. Again, it's also a research project. It needs lots more data. It's constantly learning. 5 years ago, Write and Improve wasn't really very good, but now it's amazing because it needs more and more and more data. So have a play with Speak and Improve as well. Don't trust the results on Speak and Improve at the moment would be my advice. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. It's still
a research
developing.
Project.
Okay, it needs the practice. It will be amazing, but it still needs some practice at the moment. So check that out as well. Write and Improve, Speak and Improve, Read and Improve. I think the certificate link should be coming now as we're approaching the end. And young learners. Sorry, yes. Victoria, sorry.
There is an option as well for our younger learners. On our website, there is a section Learning English, and there is a section especially for young learners. And you can find activities like this one, where students is like a game, is a very fun activity, and students can practice the different skills, listening, mainly reading and some writing, and they are going to get instant feedback. You can see that the feedback is motivating, with the monkey climbing the tree, and they are also going to be able to listen to the pronunciation of some words. So very easy to use, very straightforward, so they won't need very much parent support there.
And hopefully, it's a really nice screenshot that you've taken there, Victoria. Hopefully it will mainly say correct. Well done. Not very encouraging. Okay, so to finish off, other useful websites and resources. We have Supporting Every Teacher, which has been live since what, March, April? Victoria, what can we find on there?
We can find a lot of resources, lesson plans, activities, ideas also to motivate our students. So quite a lot of material and very organized, so it is easy to find it. And the other section, which is even more recent, it was launched at the beginning of September, and it's Your New English Classroom. There you can see the different sections available for you. And please check it out because, again, lesson plans, activities, ready to go self-access material.
And all designed over the summer, bearing in mind social distancing, face-to-face, online, hybrid. So there's a lot of good, fresh stuff there for you to access. Okay. Anything else, Victoria, or is that it? No,
that's it.
That is it. But we've got a few minutes for some questions.
Yes, and we also have the QR code for the handout with all the useful resources, hopefully useful resources that we have talked about during the presentation.
So yeah, get that QR code with your phones now, and I think we should be able to send a link as well in the chat box. Ooh. Any questions before we finish off? Oh, my screen's gone mad. Oh, no, it's back. Can you see any questions, Victoria?
I can't, but
no. But thank you all very much.
The chat is so fast that I can't.
Yeah, I know, it's quite fast. Yeah, Christopher, when we think of assessment, we mean all assessment. Oh, download your handout here. There you go. And the certificate should, well, it already has popped up, I think.
There is a question for us to give more information about Your New English Classroom. It is a section on our website. There is like a path with a different, let me see if I can get to
I'm going to see if I can get the link. You just need to go and explore it, really. It's got lots of material on it. It's got a blog, resources. Again, as I said, developed over the summer. So lesson plans for face-to-face, for online, for hybrid activities, bearing social distancing in mind.
Assessment guides as well. Very useful assessment guides. I strongly recommend.
Yeah, assessment guides to writing are really useful. Which platform do I prefer for writing assessment? Write and Improve, because then you don't have to mark it. Or you can focus on the things that the technology cannot do, like communicative achievement, organization to a certain degree, especially at higher levels.
Yeah, there was another question about brainstorming and activating students' previous knowledge. And yes, I think, George, we can agree with that, right? That brainstorming is very useful.
Definitely. Yeah,
to get students
activating schemata, background knowledge, get them more engaged, more motivated. Okay, well, thank you all very much. Lovely to see so many of you. And we'll probably see you again next year if they invite us back to speak. Who knows? Thank you. I'm glad to hear it was useful. Have a lovely end of the year, and we'll see you soon. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.